Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements in a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
From the heart of the bustling city comes the story of one woman's unyielding courage and steadfast integrity. A hero who faced resistance, defied corruption, and championed the cause of a city she loves. Meet Laura, the elected city auditor, a fearless defender of accountability. With a sharp eye for detail and a heart devoted to justice, Laura stood firm when others faltered, warning her city of wasteful spending on a beloved landmark. While others turned a blind eye, she turned to action. Amid a storm of resistance, Laura's integrity shone as bright as the sun on a sparkling ocean. Her perseverance and dedication paved the way for restoring the cherished landmark to its former glory, proving that truth and justice always prevail. Join us as we honor the tireless efforts of Laura, the city auditor whose bravery and brilliance reminds us all that real heroes rise to meet the challenges others fear to face. Now let's step into the story and discover how one hero changed her community forever.
Well, Long Beach, the city of Long Beach is known for one of our greatest icons, and it's the Queen Mary.
Yeah, I've been on that.
Yeah. Oh, nice. It's a beautiful ship.
It is. It's amazing. Huge.
Yes, it is. And it has beautiful dining and dancing and food and the whole, the scenery, the weather. There's pools, there's a spa, there's a chapel for people to get married.
Wow.
And it's this beautiful ship. And it's on the news almost every night. Like when they do the weather, it's in the background. Oh, here we are in Long Beach. And it's a huge icon.
Romantic. And I heard it's a little haunted too.
Yes, that's right.
So it's a lot of romance around it. And yeah.
One of the biggest events on the Queen Mary is something called Dark Harbor. And they create this huge haunted house. And it's the biggest revenue generating event that they have on the Queen Mary. I mean, every night from like October 15th or so until Halloween, it's packed.
Wow.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
So the Queen Mary came to Long Beach in 1967, and it sits on 45 acres of undeveloped property. And we are probably the only city in the country that has 45 acres of undeveloped premium oceanfront property.
Oh, wow.
And one of the reasons is because it belongs in the Tidelands Fund. And without going into the details of that too much, it's restricted on what can be built on that undeveloped property.
Okay.
So when the Queen Mary came to Long Beach, there wasn't a whole lot of experience in Long Beach on how to manage and operate a ship that size and what to do. But to make a long story short, and to fast forward from 1967 until 2006, when I became the city auditor.
Okay.
So that was like 40 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
They have never developed the property. Okay. And there's been no development. And the maintenance and the repair work of a ship that size, the costs are astronomical.
Who's
the ship?
They, Laura? When you say they have not developed the property, is it a private owner? Is it the city that owns the ship?
Great question.
Oh,
The city owns the ship. The city owns the ship,
holy
but
cow.
they hire operators to operate the ship.
Gotcha. Okay.
There's a lease. The city has had leases with several different operators that have not been able to make a go of it.
Yeah, because it's just so overwhelming.
And it's huge. And the Queen Mary is actually sitting in water.
Yeah.
So over time it deteriorates, and the salt water and the seepage and the rust and it exponentially, the fees get more and more every year. And
Right.
so anyway, the city I do have to just back up for a minute.
All
I
right.
was a staff auditor here in the Long Beach City Auditor's office in 1993.
Oh, is that right? Wow, that is so
Yeah.
cool. Okay.
Uh-huh.
All right.
So, and I was on one of my first audit was with the Queen Mary, and I worked with a deputy city auditor, and one of our audits was to look at the Queen Mary because at that time in 1993, the city had an agreement with the operator that if they made capital improvements on the Queen Mary, that they could take the money that they invested in the Queen Mary and offset the rent that the city was charging them for the space that they were renting. So part of what the city charged operators was rent to be there and occupancy tax, hotel occupancy taxes and things. So there was our deal was to audit to make sure they did the capital improvements to offset the rent credits they were taking. And we found that it was bogus. They weren't making the proper capital improvement project. And so ultimately, and basically back in 1993, one of our main recommendations was, look, the city needs a plan for the Queen Mary. There's no plan for this premium oceanfront property and what you want to do with the Queen Mary. So that's 1993. So now you fast forward to 2006, I come back as a city auditor.
Wow.
Nothing has changed.
Oh,
Okay. And so, but that company that I had audited from 1993, they had just filed bankruptcy when I became the city auditor.
oh, wow.
Because they got way behind on their rent. They weren't paying, the proper amount of taxes, and they filed bankruptcy.
Yeah. Oh, terrible.
Yes. So then another company came in called Save the Queen.
Oh,
And
okay.
and they were doing pretty good for a while. But again, the repairs and maintenance of the Queen Mary were so great.
Mhm.
They couldn't keep up with all the repair work and make a profit, and the developments that required in that area had a lot of restrictions because they were in the Thailand fund. You can't just develop anything on that area. So
Wow.
they filed bankruptcy.
Oh, terrible.
I know.
Terrible.
Then there was no one else who wanted to purchase the lease from them. So
I wonder why.
I know.
That old story,
Yeah.
boat is just a hole in the ground that you throw your money into.
Right.
Two entities tried to make it work as a venue and as a hotel, right?
Right. And the fact that it's a hotel, it has a lot more safety rules and regulations that have to be fire inspected and all kinds of things. If you hold a certain standard, right?
Of course.
So no one wanted it, and so the lender was Garrison, this company Garrison. They were the big lender to Save the Queen, and they became kind of the default operator. The Queen Mary continued to have guests and things. And then in 2016, it was the city. There was an item on the city council agenda that this new company called Urban Commons had come into the picture. They wanted to amend the lease with the city, and they wanted to be the operators to operate the Queen Mary. And a year before, which was unbeknownst to me, a year before this council item came on, the city had commissioned a marine study with engineers, and they did this whole study on the Queen Mary, and it said, look, the bottom line of this report said the Queen Mary needs between $239 and $285 million in repair work.
Oh, no.
So Urban Commons came to the city and said, with our engineers or whatever, we have identified 27 projects that are critical and urgent on the Queen Mary that need to be funded right now. And we need the city to front the money. We need $23 million. Actually, they asked for a lot more, and the city negotiated down to $23 million. So the city council item that I saw, this was I wasn't involved in any of the year behind the scenes negotiations or whatever took place. I have no idea what took
Because
place.
you're supposed to be independent of it, right? You're not
Right.
be in there. Okay.
So I just found the item on the city council agenda that next Tuesday night at city council, the city management was requesting the city council to approve $23 million upfront fees, give them public money to take care of these critical and urgent projects that they identified.
All right.
Okay. So I was like, what? Like, who are these people? Where did they come from? Who identified this thing? Who came up with $23 million? Who came up with the projects? How is this going to be funded? Like all these things. So I didn't really get any answers. So that night at city council, I feel like, one of the duties of an independent auditor is to be a voice of warning.
Yeah.
So, and raise red flags when you see them. So I went to city council.
This was like a huge, almost as big as a Queen Mary flag.
Yeah, I know. It was a really big.
Okay, so
I went to city council that night. It was November 1st, 2016. It was a public meeting. It's recorded. It's in the archives of the city council meetings. And this item came up and I spoke and I said that I didn't think it was wise for the city council to give $23 million for this work. That who were these? Who was Urban Commons? Who were these people we were giving this to? And what was this money for? And where was the money coming from? And they said, look, the money is coming from, we have a $5 million reserve in the Queen Mary Fund, whatever, but then we're going to bond $17 million for, we're going to bond for $17 million. And we have a Carnival Cruise Lines here. And like, we're going to take a part of the passenger fees from Carnival Cruise Lines as the revenue stream to pay back the bonds.
Mhm.
And then we're going to expect Urban Commons to, they've promised us they're going to develop the land and it's going to be a big revenue generator. And we're going to ultimately get all kinds of sales tax revenues from this new development and all these things. Well, so I just said, I didn't say this, but I knew in the back of my mind, look, I was here in 1993 when the city didn't have a plan. And when I got here in 2006, the city didn't have a plan. Now it's 2016. So I said, look, the city doesn't even have a plan. The marine study says there's about $289 million worth of repair work. And we're just going to put a Band-Aid of $23 million over this without a plan. So I just want to be on the record that I oppose this. And they're like, well, what are you asking for? I said, look, let's just delay it. Put it on the table. Let's talk about it. Let's come up with a plan. Let's not just put a Band-Aid over it. So then the city council had to field their questions, but then they just rejected me and voted and gave it to them. So one council member sided with me and said, I side with our city auditor, Laura Doud. I don't think we should do this. And I'm getting the feeling that you're all going to go ahead doing it anyway. But I just want to be on the record to say that I hope this doesn't end up being a $23 million lesson to the city. She's on the record by saying that. Okay. So they voted to give them the $23 million. The city gave them $23 million
with no evidence of doing any work.
Right. It's just like, hey, there's the
Front.
they just said
or
the
down.
Urban Commons was two guys. They came out of nowhere.
Who are these guys?
Right. Who are these guys?
So who were they? Really?
Okay, well, we're going to get.
We're
gonna
getting.
get-
You're okay. All
We're
right.
going to get there, but they were completely inexperienced, had no experience firm in Los Angeles, but the city did not do due diligence and really looking into who these guys were. And so anyway, in 2018, I found out that the $23 million had all been spent.
Duh.
Yeah, right. So we did an audit of the 23. We did an audit. We did an audit.
Okay.
And we found that out of the 27 projects they identified as critical and urgent, 7 of them were completed. So then there were like 20 that were just not. And we weren't exactly sure. Yeah, it's like, so this is the thing. I hired an accounting firm, an audit firm to help me with this.
Okay.
Okay. So an outside firm came in, asked for all these documents. I was very much involved though. I was driving things,
Yes.
and having conversations with this audit firm all the time. And So we request. So one of the questions we ask in the audit world too is like, hey, what's the criteria that you hold people to? What's the criteria for this audit you're looking at? So it's the lease agreement with the city. So we were holding
That project list
the project list
and the lease.
and a lease agreement.
All right.
Okay. So the lease agreement said that they needed to open themselves up for an audit at any time. I had the authority to do it. We requested the documentation. They didn't provide it. Just delayed after delay after delay after delay. No, we're not doing. No check register, no cash detail, no bank statements, no canceled checks, no paper trail of anything. So
Wow.
I know it was really bad. And then
Oh,
the city, so we did get a copy of invoices that they had submitted to the city. And on these invoices, Urban Commons, they self-certified that these invoices were paid. So on these invoices, it was stamped paid.
all right.
Okay. So then the city paid Urban Commons for that.
I see.
Um,
Oh gosh.
and then later we found, so it's a lot of things were happening at the same time, but what a couple of things that are happening at the same time was I was personally receiving phone calls of some fraud hotline calls, as well as emails, as well as to my personal mobile phone from people in the community that knew my number, that were like, one example was an attorney for one of the vendors working for the Queen Mary, said, these vendors were calling, said, we're not getting paid.
Oh no.
We're not getting paid. So then the accounting firm that I hired to help me with this, they found this tracker that Urban Commons had in tracking when they made payments to their invoices. So this tracker showed that they were paying their invoices way later, like an average of 51 days later after the city had paid them. So they were stamping these invoices paid when they really weren't paid.
Yeah.
And also they were just so these invoices, we weren't really sure like how legit the expenses were. Okay, but what we did find in our analysis, in digging and digging and digging, a lot of digging, we found that these invoices were there were markups. There were excessive markups. Excessive markups. And they were charging because I wrote an example. For instance, one example, we found materials that were purchased. It showed for $78,000. Materials were purchased for $78,000. There was a markup, an 18% purchases markup. So that was another $14,000. Then they did an overhead markup, which was 9%. So it added another $8,000. Then there was something called a profit markup. There was another 9% for another $8,000. So the city paid $108,000 for materials that they said cost $78,000.
Oh wow.
We were like up to 40% markups on all these things.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 170 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
So these markups, let's just say it was 50%, just to keep the math simple. They are pocketing, absorbing, whatever you want to call it, all of that money, because it wasn't going toward the ship.
Wow.
And
that wasn't contractual that they had all those markups in there.
no, right. The contract didn't talk about markups.
Well, how are these going to make a profit? Like, so they couldn't charge you guys actual, right? Because then they would lose money. So what did the contract allow as far as them profiting? Did you have a rate, or it didn't even say anything about it?
I'm trying to, let me just think for a second. How they were going to, well, the city allowed these events to take place on the Queen Mary, like I mentioned, Dark Harbor before Halloween. They were huge revenue generating
Yeah.
events. So they had the ability to make a profit.
Oh. Okay.
And
That's they were
and they had concerts. There's concerts that they sell alcohol and food, and so there's all kinds of ways that they could make a profit. But regarding the repairs, look, we need you to make the repair work. And another thing is they asked the city, look, this was not in the agreement or the contract either, but the city agreed to it, and we called it out in our audit, and it's on our website. But they had this agreement. Hey, we want 5%, like a general contracting fee. We want 5% of the $23 million right off the top. So 5% of $23 million is 1.15, whatever. The city gave that to them. So they already got $1 million just to like
show up.
They show up. They subcontracted 100% of the work. So they got $1 million just for whatever. But they weren't even paying the subcontractors really the amount that the city was paying them. We would pay them the invoice amount that they marked up, but who knows what the vendors got. It was probably just a split between like, hey, let's split the difference or something. And so, but all we know at the end of the day is
No.
at the end of the day is that the repair work was not completed on the Queen Mary. The Queen Marys continue to deteriorate by the day.
Yeah.
And okay, the repair work wasn't done, and the $23 million was gone. But there's a lot more involved in this. I want to keep note of the time. But so what happened was these guys decided to do an initial public offering in Singapore.
All right.
Okay. They created a REIT, a real estate investment trust.
They were creative. Somebody figured in finance. Okay.
Yeah. And they decided to take it to Singapore.
Yeah.
And they had, unbeknownst to the city, but they had some other hotels that were suffering and dilapidated and things that needed investments. And so they put all these hotels and they put the Queen Mary as the centerpiece into this REIT.
Oh, wow.
And what happened was, and this gets a little complicated, but I'll just keep it simple, not go into the details too much. What happened was they got the city to agree to a sublease from them to this REIT they created.
Oh, my word.
So now the REIT owns it. So the city,
Oh, my
well,
word.
now the city is still tied in. Like the city allowed this to happen.
Who's doing this at the city? Is this who are these? Is it
the city attorney's office agreed to the sublease, but I don't know if the full picture was happening at the time, because I was like, what? I didn't know about the sublease. It somehow like I'm like, I was like, what sublease is this? And so the city allowed them to go to Singapore and
sublease.
Yeah.
No.
And so these guys, they totally overvalued the Queen Mary in this REIT to sell in the stock exchange, because they wanted all these investors to come in and like get wowed about, because the Queen Mary is kind of a sexy icon, you know? And
until you go to it.
Right.
And I toured it back when I came out there to talk to you guys. It had like plywood on the deck. It was not in good shape at all.
And
so people in Singapore are not. So people in Singapore don't know that.
No.
So that's pretty smart to not do it in the U.S. because it sounds really great.
Right.
Until you see how deteriorated it is.
Yeah. And so we found out about it, and then we found that the financial documents they submitted to the SEC or whatever over in Singapore, the financial documents they submitted for the IPO did not match the financial statements they sent to the city that they were required to send to the city every year. So then even more red flags were being raised.
Yeah.
And
wow.
And then they overvalued the Queen Mary, and then someone in Singapore, like a reporter, called me one day from Singapore.
Okay.
And said, well, I hear you're doing an audit on the Queen Mary. Can you tell us what's going on? So I did. I'm like, hey, it has over $289 million worth of repair work, blah, blah, blah. And so she reported this. We were following the news in Singapore because they were reporting on our audit.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Gosh.
And then I think these two guys I wasn't involved in behind the scenes conversations, but I think these two guys told the city manager and maybe the city attorney and economic development who was over it, hey, would you get your city auditor to shut her mouth? Our stock is going down.
Ah, wow.
We're trying to raise some money here, and she's opening up her big mouth.
Whoa, good for you.
Wow.
So then I was
Oh,
like,
they're
no,
doing
like, we're not in the
stock
business. We don't care what their stock, what's going
Yeah.
on. Like, this is
Yeah. Oh my God.
so, anyway,
Now,
now
what did
we're,
the city manager say? Like, so, they got pressure to try to get you to shut up. Do you feel like your city leadership really did want you to shut up, or do you feel like,
yeah, I think they did. Yeah.
okay, done, bad?
They wanted, because they're like, look, we want this to work. I mean, no one said that to me outright, except that they were still trying to give more money on top of the 23 million to these guys. And I was like, and that's when I said, no, we should not be giving more money. This is crazy. Who are these guys and what are they doing with the money? Where's all this money going?
Mm.
So, anyway, it was going in their pockets. Okay. So our audit continued to put pressure on them, and ultimately they filed bankruptcy. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And now this was in 2021,
Oh,
and now no one wants the lease. So the city is actually owning and operating the Queen Mary right now for the first time in we've had it for 57 years.
okay.
Okay. And so it's the first time. And it's like one of the first times it's making a profit.
Oh,
And now we look back and go, you know what? Every single operator was pocketing way too much money, because now with taking away the middleman, we're actually seeing that it can make a profit. But I do have to tell you, if you were to Google the two guys that for Urban Commons, Taylor Woods and Howard Wu, and if you Google their name, they have been indicted.
by
The SEC for fraudulently,
misleading the investors, I'm sure.
misleading investors. Exactly right.
Yeah.
And,
Oh,
and
cow.
and that the news of that came out just a couple of months ago.
Wow.
And so I know I'm really proud that we spoke up, that we pursued the audit, we kept the pressure on, we got these guys out of town, we kicked them out of town basically.
Yeah. Oh,
And now we're preserving the Queen Mary.
oh, that's so beautiful. Good job.
Well,
Bravo.
it was a collective effort by a lot of people, but yeah, it's good now that, because bless her heart, if the Queen Mary could speak, she would have some stories to tell.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It is just a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It is a beautiful thing. Well, so this is kind of similar to what I hear in other cities. I've got that going on here in my city. I live in Lago Vista, Texas. We've got 2 golf courses that have been run by private entities, and one of them went bankrupt. And now people who had a golf front or a golf course home now just look at a bunch of weeds.
Oh,
Yeah, but this is golf courses are kind of like that because you're dealing with like an enterprise fund
yes.
to generate money, and the city's trying to get someone else to take it on, because enterprise funds don't always make money. They usually lose money. It sounds like the Queen Mary has that potential too, right?
Yeah.
It's gonna
Right.
that it may never actually make money.
Yeah, and I should probably clarify that statement regarding making money, because the repair work is still there.
Yeah.
And the city actually did an independent audit from me by an engineering firm to determine, independently where that $23 million or whatever, how much in repair work is still needed for those 27 projects. And that firm came back and said, there's still $23 million worth of work that still needs to be done. It was not done. And so, the city gave them, it was a $23 million lesson from the city, and the city has acknowledged it. Yep, it was a bad partner. We made a mistake. We should have done our due diligence on these guys. They turned out to be bad actors. And,
Thank goodness you spoke up and stood up and didn't shut up when you got that pressure. That's that integrity that we're famous for as auditors, right?
yes.
That's
Right.
why you keep getting reelected, because the citizens can trust you.
Oh, thank you.
They're trying to do the right
duty.
thing.
Thank you. And it's not always easy, that.
Oh, no.
We have a difficult job,
Yeah.
but it's an important job that we speak up and tell the truth and be transparent and hold government accountable for the things that, this is taxpayer money that,
And you grew
Yeah.
up in Long Beach, right? This is your home.
Yes, and I've been my whole life I've seen the Queen Mary. It's a beautiful icon right here, and we ought to, like, take care of it.
Mhm.
It's just never been a priority. And I just think one little interesting fact is that in the past, city council members have only had 2 terms, 2 4-year terms. So city council member after city council member after city council member that's only here for 8 years max if they serve both terms. It's kind of like, well, you know what? This Queen Mary is not going to sink on my watch.
Mhm.
So it's never really been a priority, and it's just sitting out there decaying. And that's when I brought it to the front, like, hey, if we're going to keep this Queen Mary here, we need to put it as a priority and come up with a plan. We never have a plan. And right now I'm looking out, there's 45 acres of undeveloped beachfront property, premium property, undeveloped right here. And it's for 57 years. We haven't been able to do anything with it. So we got to come up with a plan.
Mm.
It's the same story. It's the same thing.
Well, maybe by the time we both say goodbye to this world, it'll be taken care of.
I hope so.
'Cause that's a long time. This boat is as old as I am.
Wow.
Yeah, that aligns with my birth date.
Um,
That's been around.
in
It's been in your hands for my entire lifetime.
Wow.
But of course, it was built when in like 1930. When was?
Yes, it's over 90 years old. I want to say it's like 92 years old, something like that.
I remember all the Art Deco
Yeah,
design in the dining room. It's really spectacular.
yeah, I know. And I hope people who listen to this podcast will come visit Long Beach and come visit the Queen Mary.
Yeah, yeah.
It's-
Well, thank you, Laura, for that story. That was an amazing story that spanned decades.
yeah.
And it's still ongoing.
Yes.
Still ongoing. So are you looking at the Queen Mary in your next audit cycle? Do you have the resources to do anything around that?
Yes, it's important that we continue to just monitor the amount of money the city is spending on the repair work. I've had 2 site visits over there recently, and I've been quite impressed with the work
Oh,
that has been
good.
done. It looks so much better. If you came back to visit, you would see a noticeable difference.
Oh, great. That's
Yeah. So it's getting there. It still needs a lot more work to be done, but I think, we're slowly but surely we're making progress.
oh well, great. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for your time today, Laura, and thanks
Well,
for
thank you.
integrity.
Thank you, Lita. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, ditto. Thank you.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!